Hey there, my friends. In today's little history video, we're going to hopefully clarify an interesting distinction between two of the most iconic pieces of military equipment used during the Second World War. Namely, these two guys right here. The American Mark II grenade and the German Steel 24, respectively. Now, a lot of times in movies and TV shows and video games, these are more or less treated in the same way. You pull a pin, you throw them, they land, they go boom, shrapnel goes flying, the works. But in reality, these were two very different weapons that behaved in very different ways and were designed with two very different uses in mind. So we'll start with this guy, the Steel 24. As the name might suggest, the M24 grenade, or stick grenade, or potato masher, as many Allied troops called it, was originally developed in 1924. This right here is an evolution of a basic design dating all the way back to the Great War in 1915 with the M15 stick grenade. The only real differences being with this one, some changes to the fuse assembly, the length of the handle, and the shape of the charge head. The American Mark II grenade, often called the pineapple grenade because of the resemblance to the tropical fruit, can also trace its lineage back to the First World War, where it first saw service in 1918. Now, knowing that both these weapons came about during the First World War, let's try and put ourselves in that mindset of the kind of fighting that was going on during that particular conflict. Long periods of digging in and defending miles and miles of trench lines, punctuated by brief moments of intense combat, charging through no man's land and raiding enemy trenches. Now, most warring nations, including the Germans at first, started primarily using what were called fragmentation grenades during the First World War. These grenades are primarily designed as anti-personnel weapons that are purpose-built to kill and maim the enemy. When they explode, the outer shell of fragmentation grenades are built so that they blast shards of steel shrapnel in all directions, ripping through any soft objects that are in their path. If you use one of these in the open wastes of no man's land, they can do some decent damage to charging enemy troops. And if you use them in an enclosed area like a trench, that shrapnel effect is going to be mitigated a little bit by the walls of the structure, but you better believe that anybody in that particular area is going to have a pretty bad time. The one thing you really have to consider with a fragmentation grenade, however, is that it doesn't distinguish between friend and foe. If you throw one of these and you have friendly troops out in the open as well as enemy troops, your buddies are liable to get hit with the shrapnel as well. A fragmentation grenade is a throw and get down kind of weapon. The American Mark II grenade is a fragmentation grenade. You can see all these little pebbled bits of steel designed to create shrapnel. Now, if we look at the Steel Handgranate, on the other hand, no bumps, no grooves. This is not a fragmentation grenade. This is what's called a concussion or a high explosive grenade, and it's designed to be used very differently than its cousin, the frag grenade. As we mentioned in the context of World War I, a frag grenade can be thrown out in no man's land and take out enemy infantry on the move by throwing shrapnel all over the place. When you use a Steel Handgranate, it doesn't throw out a ton of shrapnel, it just goes boom. And it goes boom big. A standard 1944 issue Mark II pineapple grenade would be loaded with 56 grams of TNT, enough to blow these shrapnel fragments out and do some real damage. An M24 potato masher, on the other hand, is packed with 170 grams of TNT. That's more than 3 times the amount of its American counterpart. Now, if you're right next to one of these when it goes off, don't get me wrong, you're gonna have a really bad time. But the real purpose of these was what we'll call the shock and stun factor. Picture an Allied soldier in a trench during World War I, and a whole charging force of German soldiers is coming at you. If one of these lands in your trench and explodes, it's gonna knock the senses out of you. It's loud, it causes a great big explosion, and most importantly, it doesn't create a ton of shrapnel. Those German troops running in behind the grenade they just threw don't need to worry about friendly fire from their own grenade, and by the time they get to you, you're gonna be all sorts of dazed. In a war of infantry charges and assaults on defensive positions, this is a pretty handy weapon. Now, let's fast forward to World War II. Not too much has changed on the grenade front. The Allies do have some concussion grenades, and the Germans do figure out ways to modify the stick grenade to behave like a frag grenade, but the Allies are still primarily using frag grenades, while the Germans are still primarily using the potato masher. So, two different ways of approaching an issue. Throw shrapnel everywhere and do damage with your actual grenade, at the possible risk of hurting yourself and your buddies, or just make a big ass boom, charge in, and finish the job yourself. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, a lot of times in video games and such, developers don't really make much of an attempt to make the damage models of these two weapons operate differently, even though they really aren't that similar at all. Which concept do you think makes more sense? Would you rather take a Mark II pineapple grenade or an M24 stick grenade into battle? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you'd like to learn more about some iconic equipment of the Second World War, you can do so right here.